You probably know Canada for maple syrup, hockey, and endless forests where the sun seems to shine all summer long. But there's a side of the country that most people never experience. A side where the sun doesn't rise for weeks. Where the darkness is so complete that it fundamentally changes the way people live, think, and survive. Deep in the Arctic, there are towns where the winter night stretches for 2/3 of the year, where permafrost never thaws, where the aurora borealis is your only light for months. These aren't abandoned places. These are living, breathing communities of people who've chosen to stay in some of the most extreme environments on Earth. In this video, we are counting down 12 Canadian towns where the darkness is so unrelenting that it shapes every single decision, every building, every habit of the people who call them home. From towns that glow under the aurora to the northernmost inhabited place in the world. The stories get darker as we go, and number one, the place where the sun disappears for nearly 5 months straight, is the kind of town that most people couldn't survive in for more than a few days. So if you're curious about how humans live in the land of perpetual night, hit subscribe and stick with me to the end, because you won't believe number one. Number 12, Fort McPherson, Northwest Territories. If you drive north from Yellowknife along a frozen gravel road for 7 hours, you eventually reach a small collection of wooden buildings clustered along the banks of the Peel River. There's a gas station, a store, a school, and a handful of homes scattered across the tundra. The landscape is absolutely flat, just boreal forest and scrubland stretching toward a horizon you can barely see. The wind comes constantly here, cold enough to sting your face in seconds. In winter, the darkness is absolute, and the silence is unlike anything you've experienced. Fort McPherson, population around 600, sits at 67 degrees north, far enough north that the sun doesn't rise at all from late November to mid-January. The town was established as a fur trading post in the 1840s by the Hudson's Bay Company. French-Canadian voyageurs and Scottish traders built the first permanent settlement, and for over 150 years, Fort McPherson was the economic heart of the northern fur trade. The town boomed in the early 20th century. Dog sleds brought furs downriver, and indigenous Gwich'in peoples traded alongside newcomers. Schools were built, a small hospital, homes spread out along the riverbank. It was isolated, yes, but it was alive. Trappers made good money. Families built lives here. The rhythm of winter and the seasonal movement of furs and goods created a kind of stability, even in the darkness. But everything changed in the 1960s when the fur trade collapsed. Fashion moved away from fur coats. The market simply vanished. Suddenly, the economic reason for enduring this extreme darkness disappeared. People left, businesses closed. What had been a thriving supply hub became a town of people who stayed because they were born here, because family was here, or because they couldn't afford to leave. Today, the fur trade is barely a memory. The economy is built on government jobs, tourism during the aurora season, and the sheer stubbornness of a community that has decided not to die. If you visit Fort McPherson in December, you stand in complete darkness for nearly 6 hours at midday. The buildings are lit up internally, windows glowing gold against the black sky. The few people you encounter are bundled so completely that you can barely see their faces, but there's still a store running, still a school where teachers show up every day, still a community center where people gather to remind themselves they're not alone. The town hasn't been swallowed by the darkness. It's learned to live with it. Number 11. Inuvik, Northwest Territories. About 500 kilometers northwest of Fort McPherson, the Mackenzie River Delta opens into a massive fan of channels and islands. Inuvik sits on slightly higher ground here, elevated enough to avoid the worst of the spring floods. It's a larger town than Fort McPherson, around 3,400 people, and there's actual infrastructure, paved roads, a hospital, schools, a small airport. When you fly in during the Arctic winter, you descend into a landscape of white and black, snowfields and dark tundra meeting a dark sky. The town's lights are your only guide. Once you land, you realize immediately how far north this is. The sun barely grazes the southern horizon at its highest point, and for about 45 days from November to January, it doesn't rise at all. Inuvik was built entirely on purpose in the 1950s. The Canadian government decided that the Beaufort Sea region needed a modern town, and so they engineered one from scratch. The settlement was designed as a supply hub for the oil and gas industry, a place where northern development could be controlled and managed. They built it on permafrost, frozen ground that never thaws, and they made a critical decision. Everything would be built on pilings or stilts, not on the ground, because the permafrost was sinking slightly each year. Walk through Inuvik and you see buildings raised 5 or 6 feet above the earth, held up by massive metal supports driven deep into the frozen soil. It looks like a town built for a flood that will never come. For decades, Inuvik thrived. The oil boom brought money. The government was investing in northern infrastructure. Schools, hospitals, and housing were modern and well-maintained. But by the 1980s and 1990s, the economic reality was shifting. The oil industry had booms and busts. Climate change began to affect the permafrost itself. It started thawing in places it never had before, causing buildings to shift and crack. Young people began leaving for warmer places where the sun was visible year-round. The town stabilized at around 3,400 people and has stayed relatively flat since then. Today, Inuvik is a working town that doesn't feel abandoned, but doesn't feel growing either. It's in stasis. The buildings are maintained, the streets are plowed, schools are open. But if you walk down the main street in the perpetual December darkness, you see many closed storefronts. The airport keeps it connected to the south. Tourism brings people during Aurora season. But there's a sense that Inuvik is being held in place by will and infrastructure rather than by economic dynamism. The permafrost beneath the town continues to shift. The buildings groan and settle. People stay because their families are here, because jobs are here, or because they love the land despite its harshness. But everyone knows that living here requires a choice to stay, every single day. Number 10, Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Yellowknife feels different. Driving in from the south, you pass the tree line and enter tundra. The landscape opens up, then, suddenly, you see lights on the horizon. A real city, with traffic lights and restaurants and a movie theater. Yellowknife, population around 20,000, is the largest city in the Northwest Territories and a place where thousands of people have moved deliberately, seeking the darkness and the northern lights. The town was established in the 1930s during a gold rush. Prospectors found gold in the surrounding rocks, and within a decade, Yellowknife became a booming mining town. The Great Slave Lake nearby provided water. The Yellowknife River provided power. By the 1950s, there were multiple active gold mines, and the city was thriving. Families moved north for gold mining jobs, and Yellowknife developed into a real settlement with schools, shops, and a sense of economic purpose. The darkness was a fact of life, but the gold was worth it. The gold boom lasted until the 1980s and 1990s, when prices collapsed and mines began to close. Unlike Fort McPherson, which withered when its economic reason for existing disappeared, Yellowknife pivoted. The city recognized that it had something no other North American city possessed: the most accessible and most reliably clear views of the northern lights. Aurora tourism became the new gold. The city invested in hotels, viewing facilities, and marketing. By the early 2000s, Yellowknife had transformed from a mining town into an Aurora destination. Thousands of tourists arrive each winter to chase the green and pink lights across the dark sky. Today, Yellowknife is thriving in a way that most northern towns aren't. It has restaurants, a brewery, a theater, and actual cultural life. From November to February, the sun barely rises at all. It stays below the horizon almost constantly, turning the sky deep blue during the few hours of twilight around midday. But the darkness isn't something people endure here, it's the attraction. Walk down the street in Yellowknife in January, and you see people out at all hours, standing in the cold, cameras in hand, waiting for the aurora to appear. The darkness is an asset. The town has learned to sell it. And in doing so, it has become one of the few northern Canadian towns where the population is actually growing. Number 9. Iqaluit, Nunavut. To get to Iqaluit, you fly north from Ottawa over thousands of kilometers of empty tundra and frozen lakes. When you descend, you're landing on an island in the Arctic Ocean at 63 degrees north. Iqaluit is the capital of Nunavut, the youngest and largest territory in Canada, and it's a place of stark contrasts. There are modern government buildings and contemporary housing, but there's also a sense of precariousness, a town built on rock and ice, in a place that actively seems unwilling to support human settlement. Iqaluit was established as a trading post called Frobisher Bay in the 1940s by the U.S. military during World War II. When the Americans left after the war, the Inuit people who had lived here for thousands of years and the few remaining traders decided to keep the settlement going. In the 1970s and 1980s, as Canada became interested in asserting sovereignty over the Arctic, the government invested heavily in Iqaluit, making it the capital of the newly created Nunavut territory in 1999. Housing was built, offices were constructed. The government brought thousands of jobs north. The population grew from a few hundred to over 8,000 people. But Nunavut's economy was never sustainable in the way southern provinces were. There's no agricultural industry. Mining exists, but it's limited and boom and bust in nature. The territory is dependent on federal transfer payments, money flowing north from the government. Shipping is limited to a few months each summer when the ice melts. Food costs are astronomical because everything must be flown or shipped in. The government is the largest employer, and government budgets are always under pressure. Housing is desperately expensive and in short supply. If you visit Iqaluit in winter, you experience near total darkness from November through January. At midday in December, the sun never rises above the horizon. It's a perpetual twilight that lasts only a few hours. The rest of the time is absolute black. The wind is constant and brutal. Snowdrifts bury the roads. Most people don't go outside unnecessarily. They walk from building to building through enclosed walkways when possible, or they bundle up completely and make a dash for their destination. The town feels fragile, a place that humans are occupying by sheer force of will and government funding, but which the landscape resists actively. Iqaluit is growing because the government is here, because indigenous peoples are reclaiming their homeland, and because the Arctic is becoming more accessible. But it's a town that feels like it could empty out quickly if the government funding stopped, or if some other shift in Canada's economic priorities occurred. Number 8. Qikiqtarjuaq, Nunavut north from Iqaluit, out into Baffin Island. There are smaller settlements that are even more remote. Qikiqtarjuaq, population around 450, sits on an island in the Davis Strait. It's one of the northernmost communities in Nunavut, at 67 degrees north. To get there, you must fly on a small plane, and the flight is possible only when weather permits. In winter, you might be stranded for days if a blizzard moves in and grounds all aircraft. Qikiqtarjuaq was established by the Hudson's Bay Company in the late 1800s as a fur trading post. For over a century, it remained a small trading settlement where Inuit hunters brought seal and whale and traded for supplies. The economy was stable and seasonal. Summer meant hunting in open water. Winter meant hunting on the ice and ice seals. The darkness was part of the rhythm, a time when seal hunting was at its peak, when families gathered indoors, when the community came together. In the 1960s, the Canadian government forcibly relocated many Arctic peoples from the most remote areas into larger settlements like Qikiqtarjuaq, ostensibly to provide better access to education and services. The population of the settlement swelled with people who had been moved against their will. But the economy didn't change. The hunting remained the primary way people survived. Schools were built, a nursing station, a store. But the town was always too small to support itself through wages alone. Most families still hunted and fished for subsistence. Traditional knowledge remained essential. Today, Qikiqtarjuaq is a community of about 450 people who are working to reclaim and revive their traditional ways after decades of government pressure to assimilate. From November through January, the town experiences polar night, 60 days where the sun never rises. The darkness lasts for most of the day year-round from November to February. Walking through Qikiqtarjuaq in January, you see a small cluster of colorful houses and buildings surrounded by infinite black and white. Black sky, black ice, white snow. The only light comes from the interior of buildings and the occasional gleam of the moon or stars reflecting off ice. Life here is centered on survival and community. There are no hotels for tourists. There's barely a restaurant. This is a place where people live because their families have lived here for generations, and because the land and the sea still provide what they need. Number 7. Pond Inlet, Nunavut farther north along Baffin Island. Pond Inlet sits at 72 degrees north, on the edge of the Northwest Passage. The town of about 1,600 people is perched on the edge of a frozen fjord, surrounded by mountains. The landscape here is stunning. Dramatic cliffs of dark stone dropping into ice, glaciers flowing from inland mountains, an Arctic that feels genuinely wild. Pond Inlet was established as a whaling station in the early 1900s. The waters around the island were rich with bowhead whales, and commercial whalers from Scotland and Norway came north for the hunt. They built shore stations and killed whales by the hundreds. The town that formed around the whaling industry was prosperous for a few decades, but by the 1930s, whale populations had been hunted nearly to extinction. The whaling industry collapsed. Commercial whalers packed up and left. The Inuit people who had supported and been affected by the whaling industry adapted, returning to traditional seal hunting as the primary food source and economic activity. By the 1950s and 1960s, Pond Inlet was a small, isolated settlement of a few hundred people. In the 1990s, tourism began to change the dynamic. Tourists wanted to see polar bears, see the Arctic landscape, experience the northern lights. Pond Inlet, with its access to good polar bear habitat and its dramatic location, became a tourism hub. Today, the town is a real settlement with hotels, restaurants, and guide services. It's a working economy based on a combination of government jobs, hunting and fishing, and tourism. If you visit Pond Inlet in December, you're in darkness for about 20 hours a day. The sun barely grazes the horizon in the south around midday, creating a prolonged twilight that lasts an hour or two. The rest of the time is night. The buildings here are designed for this darkness. Large windows, interior lighting, weatherproofing so complete that you feel sealed in. The ice on the fjord is thick enough to walk on. The town feels like it's on the edge of the habitable world, and in a real sense, it is. Number 6, Resolute Bay, Nunavut. Continuing north, you reach Resolute Bay at 74 degrees north. To get here, you fly on small planes from the south. There are no roads. The town of about 200 people is built on Cornwallis Island in the high Arctic. The landscape is Arctic tundra at its most extreme, rolling, barren, with permafrost so deep that it may never thaw. The horizon is empty in every direction except toward the south, where you can barely make out other islands. Resolute Bay has an unusual history. It wasn't established through natural economic development. It was established as an assertion of Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic. In 1947, the Canadian government forcibly relocated about 100 Inuit people from Inukjuak in Quebec to Resolute Bay and Grise Fjord, over 2,000 kilometers away, in a relocation program that was intended to establish permanent human presence in the Arctic and strengthen Canada's claim to the region. The relocation was traumatic. Many of the relocated people suffered from the harsh conditions and the separation from their families and homeland. The Canadian government's motivations were primarily political, not humanitarian. For decades, the truth about the relocation was minimized. It wasn't until the 1990s that the story became widely known, and in 2006, the Canadian government offered a formal apology and a settlement to the survivors and their families. Today, Resolute Bay remains one of the most remote inhabited places in North America. The population hovers around 200, though it fluctuates depending on government jobs and research contracts. There's a research station that studies Arctic climate and permafrost. There are government offices, a school, a tiny store. The town is built on rock and permafrost. Buildings are raised on pilings. Nothing is permanent here. The darkness lasts from late October through mid-February, nearly 4 months where the sun doesn't rise above the horizon. In midwinter, around the winter solstice, there's a brief period of twilight at midday, about 2 hours where the sky is a deep dark blue instead of absolute black. Then it's night again. Temperatures drop to -40°C regularly. The wind is constant. If you visit Resolute Bay, you're visiting one of the most extreme settlements in the world. There's no tourism infrastructure because almost no tourists come. There are no restaurants, no hotels in the traditional sense. The settlement survives because the government maintains it and because indigenous peoples refuse to abandon their homeland, despite the government's historical attempts to use them as political tools. The town is quiet, isolated, and profoundly dark for most of the year. Number 5, Grise Fjord, Nunavut. Even more remote than Resolute Bay, Grise Fjord sits at 76 degrees north on Ellesmere Island. The population is only about 150 people, making it one of the smallest permanent settlements in Canada. Like Resolute Bay, Grise Fjord was established through forced relocation. Inuit families from Inukjuak were moved here in 1953 by the Canadian government as part of the same sovereignty assertion program. The relocation was intended to be temporary, but many families ended up staying. The settlement persisted. Community formed around the forced placement, and people built lives in one of the most extreme environments imaginable. Grise Fjord sits in a fjord on the east coast of Ellesmere Island, surrounded by mountains and glaciers. The landscape is Arctic tundra and rock. The settlement itself is extremely small, a cluster of maybe 20 buildings spread out along the shoreline. The population is tiny, but it's stable. People here hunt seal and muskox. The government provides services and salaries. The ice is so thick and reliable that in winter, the fjord becomes another landscape to traverse. From November through January, Grise Fjord experiences polar night. The sun doesn't rise at all for about 40 days, centered around the winter solstice. Even before and after this period, The daylight is minimal. An hour or two of twilight at midday is the only break in the darkness. The temperatures are brutal. Winds push up from the Arctic Ocean and funnel through the fjord. The settlement is so small that life revolves entirely around the community. Everyone knows everyone. Survival depends on knowing the land, knowing the ice, knowing how to hunt, and how to prepare for the extreme darkness. If you visit Grise Fjord, you're visiting a settlement that was built against the will of the people who now inhabit it, in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. It's a place that tests the meaning of home and belonging. People here didn't choose to come, but many have chosen to stay. The community is close-knit out of necessity. The darkness is not something to overcome, but something to live within, to expect, to prepare for. Number 4. Cambridge Bay, Nunavut northwest from Grise Fjord. Across the ice archipelago of the Canadian Arctic lies Cambridge Bay on Victoria Island at 69 degrees north. Cambridge Bay is a larger settlement than the previous entries, around 1,500 people, and it's becoming increasingly important strategically. The town sits on the Northwest Passage, the water route through the Arctic that has historically been frozen solid and impassable, but which is becoming increasingly navigable as Arctic ice melts with climate change. Cambridge Bay was established in the 1840s as a Hudson's Bay Company trading post. For over a century, it remained a small trading settlement where Inuit hunters traded furs and seal. In the 1950s, it was expanded with government investment as part of Arctic sovereignty efforts, and a military airbase was built. During the Cold War, Cambridge Bay was a strategic location on the edge of Soviet territory. The military presence brought infrastructure and jobs, but when the Cold War ended and military spending declined, many of those jobs disappeared. Today, Cambridge Bay is experiencing a renaissance. As the Arctic ice melts and the Northwest Passage becomes a viable shipping route between Europe and Asia, Cambridge Bay is becoming increasingly strategically important. The port is being expanded. Government research institutions are being located here. New infrastructure is being built. The population is growing. It's one of the few Arctic communities where you can feel economic momentum and growth. But the darkness remains extreme. From November through January, Cambridge Bay experiences nearly complete darkness. The sun barely grazes the horizon at the solstice, and for about 40 days around December 21st, it doesn't rise at all. For most of the day from November through February, the sky is dark. The settlement is built on permafrost that is beginning to thaw as the climate changes. Buildings are shifting. The landscape is changing, but the community is adapting and growing, driven by economic opportunity and by the determination of residents who see the Arctic not as a place to escape, but as a place to build in. Number 3. Alert, Nunavut. You can't drive to Alert. You can't get there by regular ferry. There's no commercial airline service. To visit Alert, you must charter a helicopter or a military transport plane and fly north across hundreds of kilometers of Arctic tundra and ice. Alert, at 82 degrees north, is the northernmost inhabited place in the world. It's so remote that it feels less like a town and more like a research station or military outpost, which, in many ways, it is. Alert was established in 1956 as a Canadian military signal station, part of the Cold War defense apparatus against Soviet expansion. A small group of military personnel was stationed here to monitor radio signals and maintain communications with southern Canada and NATO. The station was built on high ground on the Kaitanik Peninsula, in a landscape of barren tundra and rock. The population has remained tiny, usually around 50 to 100 military and civilian personnel. They rotate in and out. Nobody stays permanently because the conditions are so extreme that human psychology begins to break down after extended exposure. Alert is defined by polar night. From mid-October through late February, the sun doesn't rise above the horizon at all. The darkness lasts for 128 days straight. In midwinter, there's no twilight, no break in the complete black except for starlight and moonlight reflecting off ice and snow. Temperatures regularly reach -50 Celsius. Wind chill can push temperatures to -80. The landscape offers no shelter. The permafrost is so deep and so hard that you could dig for weeks and not reach anything but frozen rock and ice. The people stationed at Alert experience what researchers call polar night depression. The complete absence of sunlight, combined with the extreme isolation, causes measurable psychological effects. Insomnia is common even when people are exhausted. Mood disorders are frequent. The Canadian military has strict rotation policies. Nobody serves at Alert for more than a few years. The work is important for national defense and Arctic sovereignty, but it comes at a cost. Alert represents the absolute edge of where humans can live, the point at which the environment becomes so extreme that permanent habitation requires not just technology and infrastructure, but also a willingness to endure profound psychological stress. Number 2. Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories. For the second entry, we're moving slightly south and west to a different kind of darkness and vulnerability. Tuktoyaktuk sits at 69 degrees north on the Beaufort Sea, in the Northwest Territories. The town of about 900 people sits on a narrow peninsula surrounded by water on 3 sides. The landscape is permafrost tundra meeting Arctic Ocean. The community has an unusual appearance. It's dotted with pingos, which are ice-cored hills that rise from the permafrost. They look like perfect inverted bowls of earth and rock, and they're unique to the high Arctic. Tuktoyaktuk was established as a fur trading post and whaling station in the late 1800s. For over a century, it was an important hub for Arctic commerce. Whalers and traders came in summer when the ice was out. Inuit hunters brought furs and seal and whale. The town prospered. By the 1970s and 1980s, Tuktoyaktuk was a working community of several thousand people, built around fishing, hunting, and oil industry support. But Tuktoyaktuk faces an existential crisis that makes it unique among northern settlements. The permafrost beneath the town and around it is thawing rapidly, faster than anywhere else in Canada. In some areas, the permafrost is retreating up to 2 meters per year. Ground that has been frozen for thousands of years is thawing within a few years. The pingos are collapsing. The ground that the town is built on is becoming unstable. In some areas, ground that was solid ice is becoming mud. Buildings are sinking. Roads are cracking. The coastal permafrost is particularly vulnerable, and Tuktoyaktuk is on the coast. Erosion is eating away at the town's edges. Scientists estimate that within decades, significant portions of Tuktoyaktuk could simply sink into newly thawed mud or wash into the sea. The Canadian government has been discussing relocation, but where would 900 people go? Relocation is traumatic. Communities don't want to abandon their homes and territories. So Tuktoyaktuk persists, even as the ground beneath it becomes unreliable. In winter, from November through January, the town experiences extended darkness, about 20 hours of darkness per day at the winter solstice. But the darkness is almost secondary to the deeper crisis. The town is disappearing not because people are leaving, but because the permafrost is thawing. The land itself is becoming uninhabitable. It's a slow-motion disaster unfolding in real time. People wake up each morning in Tuktoyaktuk knowing that their town is literally melting. Cracks appear in foundations. The ground settles unevenly. It's a kind of darkness that has nothing to do with the absence of the sun, but everything to do with the absence of certainty about the future. Number 1. Barrow, Alaska. Wait, no. Joa Haven, Nunavut. Actually, we're staying in Canada for the final entry. We're going to Joa Haven, at 68 degrees north on King William Island, in the Canadian Arctic. Joa Haven is a settlement of about 1,300 people, and it holds a unique and profound darkness. Not just the darkness of the perpetual Arctic night, though that's certainly here. From November through January, Joa Haven experiences what amounts to continuous twilight in the best case, and 20 hours of complete darkness in most cases. But the darkness here is also historical, mythological, and psychological. Joa Haven was established by Roald Amundsen in 1903 during his expedition to transit the Northwest Passage. Amundsen and his crew wintered in Joa Haven for 2 years while attempting to complete the first transit of the Northwest Passage by ship. Amundsen chose Joa Haven specifically because it offered shelter, and because indigenous Inuit people lived here and could provide knowledge of survival in the Arctic. During those 2 years, Amundsen's expedition experienced profound psychological stress. The men dealt with darkness lasting months, with isolation, with the knowledge that they were in one of the most remote places on Earth, separated from the rest of the world by thousands of kilometers and impassable ice. Amundsen's account from those winters is haunting. He describes the depression that set in around November when the sun failed to rise. He describes men going mad or nearly mad from the combination of darkness and isolation. He describes the psychological breakpoint that occurs after weeks of complete darkness, when the mind begins to lose its anchor to time and reality. Amundsen's wintering in Joa Haven is documented as one of the psychological trials of polar exploration. Yet Amundsen survived it and went on to be the first to reach the South Pole. Today, Joa Haven is a working settlement where Inuit people live primarily through hunting and fishing. The government provides services and employment. There's a school, a nursing station, a store, but the settlement is relatively isolated and small. The summer brings a brief season of abundant daylight and the opportunity to hunt and fish intensively. The winter brings the extended darkness that defined Amundsen's experience 120 years ago. From late October through mid-February, the sun is below the horizon most or all of the time. The people of Joa Haven have adapted to this cycle over generations. They know how to prepare physically and psychologically for the darkness. They understand the rhythms of the land and the ice. They have community structures and cultural practices that help people endure, but the darkness is still profound. Walk through Joa Haven in December and you're walking through a landscape of nearly complete blackness except for the few hours of twilight at midday. The buildings glow from within. People move between buildings, bundled completely against the cold. The settlement feels like a small island of human habitation in a vast, dark, and indifferent Arctic landscape. What makes Joa Haven the #1 entry isn't just the length or intensity of the darkness, though that's certainly extreme. It's the psychological weight of that darkness. It's a place where the Arctic night has been experienced and documented as genuinely dangerous to human psychology. It's a place where the darkness has a recorded history of breaking minds. Yet people live here. They raise families here. They build lives in the long night. They've adapted to something that explorers like Amundsen found nearly unbearable. The Arctic darkness in Joa Haven isn't something to overcome or conquer. It's something to live within, to respect, and to understand as a fundamental part of existing in the high Arctic. The people here have built a relationship with the darkness, not one of fear, but one of acceptance. That transformation from fear and despair to acceptance and adaptation is the real story of Joa Haven. It's a place where humans have learned to live in conditions that, on paper, should be impossible. The darkness lasts for 4 months. The cold is profound, the isolation is real, yet the community persists, generation after generation, in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Canadian Arctic and the towns where darkness defines life. If you did, please make sure to share this video with your friends, and I'll see you in the next one.